The air inside Mr. Hammond's office felt heavier than grief. It smelled like polished mahogany, expensive cologne, and expectation. The kind of expectation that suffocates you before anyone says a word. The walls were lined with leather-bound law books that no one in my family had ever actually read. The long conference table gleamed beneath the chandelier. At its center sat a silver tray holding several sealed documents, each one thick. Important, except mine. Mine was smaller, thinner, almost insulting. I sat at the far end of the table, fingers curled around the same old purse I'd carried since college. The leather was worn at the corners, I'd never replaced it. No one ever noticed things like that about me. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace as if she were attending a gala instead of a will reading. Her posture was flawless, composed, elegant, performing grief. My father sat upright, jaw tight, eyes locked on the lawyer like a man waiting to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. And my brother Victor, he pretended not to care. He was whispering stock numbers into his phone beneath the table. But the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. He cared. Oh, he cared. Mr. Hammond cleared his throat and began reading. His voice was calm, professional, rehearsed. To my son, Howard West, I leave my controlling shares of West Maritime Group, my father exhaled. Slow, victorious. That familiar expression settled on his face. The one I'd seen my entire life. The look of a man who believed the world always bends in his favor. To my daughter-in-law, Evelyn West, I bequeath the Napa Valley estate and its adjoining vineyard. My mother let out a delicate little laugh. Covered her mouth, as if joy at a funeral was impolite. Victor shifted forward in his seat, impatient. To my grandson, Victor West, I leave my collection of classic automobiles and the Manhattan penthouse. There it was, his smirk. He didn't even try to hide it, and then silence. Mr. Hammond adjusted his glasses. And to my granddaughter, Clara West, he paused, too long, long enough for my mother's eyes to slide toward me. Long enough for Victor's mouth to curl slightly. I leave this envelope. That was it, no property, no shares, no estate, just an envelope. Someone coughed to disguise a laugh. The sound cut deeper than it should have. My mother tilted her head, sympathy dripping from her voice like poison wrapped in honey. Well, I suppose Grandpa believed in sentimental gestures. Victor chuckled softly. I didn't move. I couldn't. The envelope sat on the table in front of me, small, cream-colored, sealed with a faded red wax crest. It looked insignificant, but it felt deliberate. I reached for it slowly. The paper was thick, expensive, not symbolic, intentional. I'm sure it's something thoughtful, my mother continued, patting my hand like I was fragile porcelain. You were always the sentimental one. Their laughter wasn't loud. That would have been easier. It was soft, sharp. The kind that slides under your skin and stays there. My chest tightened, but I refused to break. For years, I had been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who held cameras during Christmas while everyone else posed. The one who listened when they argued, the one who comforted when deals failed, the one who disappeared when things were good again. And now I was the punchline. At my grandfather's will reading, Mr. Hammond closed the folder. There are no further directives. Chairs scraped against marble floors. Expensive shoes moved toward the door. No one looked at me. They didn't need to. Their satisfaction filled the room. I waited until the last echo of their voices disappeared down the hall before slipping the envelope into my coat pocket. Outside, Seattle's sky hung low and gray. Cold wind whipped strands of hair across my face. Through the glass windows, I could still see them inside. My mother checking her reflection. Victor showing my father something on his phone, all of them smiling, untouched by doubt. The envelope burned in my pocket. Part of me wanted to throw it away, erase the humiliation before it carved itself deeper into me. But another voice, quiet, steady, survived. Not yet. When I reached my car, I didn't start the engine. Rain began tapping against the windshield. Soft, persistent. I pulled the envelope out and turned it over in my hands. My name was written in his handwriting, neat, precise, unmistakable. Beneath it, a single word, confidential. My throat tightened. I broke the wax seal. Inside was one sheet of ivory paper and a plain ticket. I stared at it, blinking, reading it twice, then 3 times. You are requested to appear in person at Rosenberg Private Trust, Geneva, Switzerland for verification of inheritance. Geneva, Switzerland. My grandfather had never mentioned Switzerland, not once. Below the formal printed text were 4 handwritten words: "Trust the game, Clara." My fingers trembled. Trust the game. He used to say that when we played chess on the porch during summers, when I'd rush a move, when I'd panic, when I couldn't see 5 steps ahead. Life is a bigger board, he'd say. The trick isn't winning quickly. It's making sure your last move matters. I read the letter again: verification of inheritance. Inheritance. The word felt heavier than the envelope itself. If this was a joke, it was cruel, but it wasn't a joke. It was his handwriting. The same slanted ink from birthday cards, from the little notes he used to leave inside my textbooks. I leaned back in the driver's seat and stared at the rain sliding down the windshield. Geneva, 4 days from now. 4 days to decide whether I would remain the family afterthought or follow a dead man's riddle across the ocean. That evening my mother called, her voice syrupy sweet. "Sweetheart, don't be upset about today. Your grandfather was dramatic." I didn't answer. She continued, "If there's some symbolic trip involved, Switzerland is lovely this time of year. Maybe you'll find yourself." In the background, I heard Victor laughing, celebrating his penthouse. My father's deep voice carried through the phone. Pride, ownership, certainty. I hung up, walked to my window. The rain blurred the city lights. The envelope lay open on my kitchen table. The ticket glinted beneath the lamp. 4 days. 4 days to choose. I opened the drawer in my bedroom and pulled out the chessboard my grandfather gave me when I was 12. One pawn was missing. He'd left it that way intentionally. "To remind you," he once said, "that sometimes you play short-handed and still win." I ran my thumb over the worn wood pieces. He wasn't sentimental. He was strategic. And for the first time, I wondered if the envelope wasn't humiliation. But the first move, I looked at the ticket again, then I whispered into the quiet apartment, "All right, Grandpa." A pause. "Let's play," and before fear could talk me out of it, I opened my laptop and booked the flight. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It felt like the sky was trying to wash something clean, maybe me. I spent those 48 hours pacing between my window and the suitcase on my bed. Every few minutes, I would reopen the envelope, reread the letter, trace the ink of his handwriting like it might disappear if I didn't memorize it. Verification of inheritance. Those 3 words echoed in my head louder than my mother's laughter. By the 3rd morning, doubt started whispering. What if this was symbolic? What if I flew across the world just to be handed a sentimental keepsake and a polite handshake? What if I embarrassed myself exactly the way my family expected? I sat at my small kitchen table, laptop open, and typed, "Rosenberg Private Trust, Geneva." The results weren't poetic. They were intimidating: private banking, international holdings, multi-generational wealth management, discretion, confidentiality, power. Every page I clicked felt like I was stepping into a world that did not belong to me, and yet my name was on that ticket. My grandfather's handwriting was real. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. "Mother," I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through seconds later, crisp and composed. "Clara, sweetheart, please don't embarrass yourself chasing fantasies. Those firms handle serious wealth, not feelings. If this is some symbolic nonsense, just shred it and move on." Move on. She'd used that phrase my entire life when I didn't get into law school. When Victor crashed my car and blamed me for parking it wrong. When Grandpa got sick. Move on. As if pain was a stain you could wipe away if you pretended it didn't exist. I didn't call her back. Instead, I went to my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. The smell of cedar and old paper rose up. At the bottom lay the chessboard. I lifted it carefully and placed it on the bed. The missing pawn still wasn't there. He'd smiled when I noticed it years ago. "Sometimes you begin the game at a disadvantage," he told me, "but that only matters if you believe it does." I sat there staring at the board for a long time. Then I understood something that made my pulse steady instead of race. He wasn't giving me a souvenir, he was giving me a move. By midnight, my decision felt inevitable. I booked the flight, first class. The confirmation email sat in my inbox like proof that I'd crossed an invisible line. The next morning, I requested personal leave from the school where I taught. My principal frowned gently. "You're one of our most reliable teachers, Clara. Is everything okay?" I held her gaze. "I think I need to find something out." She didn't press. Packing was strangely easy. A black coat, 2 dresses, my passport, the letter. The chessboard stayed behind. Somehow I knew I wouldn't need it physically anymore. Thursday night, my mother invited me to dinner. I almost declined, but something inside me wanted to watch their faces when I told them. The dining room looked exactly the same as it had the day of the will reading. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, candles burning like they were rehearsing elegance. Victor was scrolling through photos of his penthouse in Manhattan. "You should see the view, Clara, you'd probably faint." "I'm sure it's beautiful," I said, pouring water into my glass. Mother smiled too brightly. "So, any plans this weekend?" "Something relaxing after that emotional little gathering at the lawyer's office?" I let the silence stretch, then I said it. "I'm flying to Switzerland tomorrow." The table went quiet, not polite quiet, real quiet. Victor laughed first. "You're what? You heard me." My father set down his fork. "For what purpose?" I pulled the letter from my purse and slid it across the table. He scanned it. His expression hardened. "Clara, these institutions do not randomly invite school teachers for inheritance verification. You're wasting your money." "It's already paid for," I said. "First class." Mother's eyebrow arched. "And who's financing that?" "Grandpa." Her laugh was sharp. "He was not some secret international banker, Clara. You're being naive." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the pearls she wore even at home, at the manicured hands that never shook when she humiliated someone gently. "Maybe I am," I said quietly, "but I'd rather be naive and curious than cynical and stuck." For once, she didn't have a reply. Dinner continued, but something had shifted. The jokes weren't as sharp, the confidence wasn't as loud. When I stood to leave, Mother called after me, "Switzerland is expensive. Don't come crying when your credit card bill arrives." I smiled. "I won't." Outside, the night air was cold and clean. The clouds had parted. The moon hung sharp and silver above the house. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something that wasn't humiliation. It was momentum. I left for the airport before sunrise. Seattle's streets were slick from rain. The terminal buzzed quietly. At check-in, the agent looked at her screen and then at me. "Miss West, seat 2A, first class." I blinked. "So it's real?" She smiled politely. "Very real." As I settled into the wide leather seat, champagne offered before takeoff, I felt out of place. Like someone might tap my shoulder and say there'd been a mistake. No one did. When the plane lifted off, the city shrank beneath clouds. The knot in my chest loosened. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. Hours later, somewhere over the Atlantic, I unfolded the letter again. Trust the game. Trust had never been easy for me, not in that house, not at that table, but maybe that was the point. When the flight attendant whispered that we were descending into Zurich, I pressed my forehead to the window. Snow-capped mountains pierced the horizon. The sun rose behind them, spilling gold over white peaks. It didn't look real. The wheels touched down softly. The cabin filled with polite applause. I stepped into Swiss air and inhaled. It felt sharper. Cleaner, intentional. Customs was seamless. The officer stamped my passport without hesitation. When I entered the arrivals hall, I wasn't sure what I expected. Confusion, delay, a receptionist telling me there had been some misunderstanding. Instead, I saw him, a tall man in a dark overcoat holding a sign. "Miss Clara West, Rosenberg Private Trust." My pulse stumbled. He met my eyes immediately, steady, professional. "Miss West?" he asked in lightly accented English. "Yes," he nodded once. "My name is Lucas Mayer. I've been instructed to escort you." Escort. The word sent a strange thrill through me. "Escort to where?" "To your grandfather's estate," he said calmly. I froze. My grandfather never owned property in Switzerland. Lucas held my gaze, not under his American name. The air shifted. The world tilted slightly off its axis. Outside, a sleek black Bentley waited at the curb. The door opened. I slid inside. The leather was cool beneath my hands. As we drove away from the airport, Zurich unfolded like a painting. Clean streets, stone buildings, lake water shimmering under pale sunlight. After a while, Lucas spoke. "Your grandfather visited often?" I turned toward him. "He did. He valued discretion." I stared out the window. Discretion. That wasn't the man I knew. The man I knew wore old sweaters and drove a pickup truck. The man I knew made jokes in grocery store lines. But maybe that was the version they saw. Maybe I'd only seen a fraction too. The city faded behind us. The road began to climb. Snow thickened along the edges. Pine trees lined the winding path like silent witnesses. Where exactly are we going? I asked. Near Lake Geneva, Lucas replied. The Rosenberg estate. Estate. The word didn't feel attached to my grandfather, and yet as the trees parted I saw it, lights glowing through snowfall, a vast stone house rising from the landscape. Steep roofs, tall windows, iron gates carved with an emblem, Rosenberg Private Trust. The gates opened silently. The car rolled forward, 2 guards nodded as we passed. My reflection in the window looked unfamiliar, not smaller. Not humiliated, just alert, present. The Bentley stopped at the foot of wide stone steps. A man in a tailored gray suit stood waiting under an umbrella, silver hair, sharp posture. He descended the steps as Lucas opened my door. Good evening, Miss West, he said, bowing slightly. I am France, caretaker of the estate. Estate, the word echoed again. It is an honor to finally meet you. Your grandfather spoke of this day. Spoke of this day. My heart pounded steadily now, not from fear, from recognition. As I stepped inside, warmth enveloped me. The foyer was enormous. Marble floors, antique rugs, crystal chandeliers casting soft golden light. A fireplace crackled somewhere deeper in the house. It smelled like cedar and polished stone. We walked past portraits lining the walls, some landscapes, some ships at sea, and then a photograph, my grandfather, younger. Standing on a balcony overlooking the same lake outside. I stopped in front of it. He looked different, sharper, determined, as if this version of him knew something the rest of us didn't. He built this, I whispered. France inclined his head. Brick by brick, quietly, my throat tightened. Brick by brick, quietly, a door opened behind me, footsteps approached. Miss West. I turned. A tall man in his mid-40s stood in the doorway, perfectly tailored suit, steel gray eyes. Measured presence? I'm Adrian Keller, he said, extending his hand, chief executor of Rosenberg Trust. His handshake was firm, controlled. You've come a long way, he added. I looked around the grand room, the firelight. The lake beyond the windows, the portrait of my grandfather watching silently from the wall. Yes, I said, I have. And in that moment I knew something irreversible had begun. Adrian didn't waste time. He gestured toward a sitting room just beyond the foyer. The fire inside burned low and steady, like it had been waiting for me. A leather folder rested on the table between 2 chairs. Everything in this house felt prepared, anticipated, calculated. Please, he said. I sat. My hands were steady now, not because I wasn't nervous, but because something deeper had taken over, curiosity. Adrian remained standing for a moment, studying me as if confirming something privately. Before we proceed, he said evenly, I need to ask you a simple question. I met his eyes. Did you come here hoping for money or for answers? The question didn't offend me, it clarified everything. Answers, I said, a pause. Good. He took the seat across from me and opened the folder. Inside were documents. Seals, signatures, numbers, rows of numbers, the kind that don't feel real when you first look at them. This, Adrian began, sliding the top document toward me, is the international portfolio of Rosenberg Private Trust. I frowned. My grandfather wasn't involved in international finance. Adrian's expression didn't change. He was more involved than anyone knew. I looked down again. Property holdings in Switzerland, shipping contracts in Asia, luxury hospitality investments across Europe, private equity stakes, offshore accounts. My stomach tightened. This doesn't make sense. It does, Adrian replied calmly. You simply weren't meant to see it yet. The fire cracked behind me. The sound made the silence sharper. In 1998, he continued, your grandfather quietly established Rosenberg Trust after a disagreement with his partners at West Maritime. Disagreement? Adrian held my gaze. They attempted to force him out. The words didn't land immediately. Force him out, I repeated. Yes, on grounds of age, claimed his judgment was declining. They positioned it as a necessary transition. My chest felt hollow. They, I asked, though I already knew, your father and several board members aligned with him. The room seemed to narrow. That's not possible, I said automatically. Adrian didn't argue. He simply reached into the folder and placed another document in front of me, board restructuring proposal. Signatures, Howard West, my father. The date was over a decade ago. I swallowed. He anticipated it, Adrian said quietly, long before it happened. The chessboard, the missing pawn, patience. So he built something separate, I said slowly. Yes, Untouchable? Yes. I stared at the documents again. And no one knew, no one outside a very small circle. And you, I was one of the first hires, Adrian replied. He wanted someone who understood discretion. A slow realization moved through me. My grandfather built a second empire, Adrian inclined his head. In silence, the words hit differently. Second empire, not revenge, not reaction, creation. For 10 years, Adrian continued, Rosenberg Trust has expanded under his direction. Shipping, real estate, hospitality, strategic acquisitions. My eyes skimmed the numbers again. They weren't modest. They weren't symbolic. They were massive. Why? I asked. Adrian leaned back slightly. Because he believed control should never rest in the hands of those who mistake greed for leadership. The fire popped, my throat tightened. And he gave it to me? Not yet. The words snapped my attention back to him. Not yet. Tomorrow, Adrian said calmly, you will travel to Geneva for identity verification. Upon confirmation, the trust transfers fully under your authority. Authority. The word felt foreign. And if I hadn't come, I asked. Adrian didn't hesitate. It would have remained dormant. Forever, until you decided otherwise. I exhaled slowly. He trusted me to choose. The weight of that settled heavier than the numbers. Adrian slid another document forward. This, he said, is where it becomes personal. My eyes scanned the page. West Maritime Holdings. Silent partner Rosenberg Trust. 51% ownership. The air left my lungs. He still owned it, I whispered. Majority stake, Adrian confirmed. My mind reeled. My father has been running that company for years. Yes, believing it was his. Yes, and it wasn't. Adrian didn't smile. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. For over a decade, he said, Rosenberg Trust maintained controlling interest through shell subsidiaries and layered holdings. Your father never knew. I stared at the page. 51% majority control, my father's pride. Victor's inheritance, all of it resting on something they never saw. The humiliation at the will reading replayed in my mind. The smirk, the laughter, the envelope. You said he saw how they treated me, I said quietly. Adrian's gaze softened slightly. He did, and that mattered. It mattered more than you think. He reached into the folder again and retrieved a small, ornate wooden box. He placed it gently in front of me. He asked me to give you this after you understood the structure of the trust. My fingers felt colder now. I opened it slowly. Inside lay a single gold key and a folded note. The paper smelled faintly of cedar. I unfolded it carefully. You once asked why I taught you chess instead of business, because both require vision. The difference is this: in chess, no one applauds until the end. Trust the silence. It means you're winning. I closed my eyes. I could hear his voice saying it. Calm, certain, no theatrics, no rage, just strategy. What does the key open? I asked. Adrian's answer was measured. Some doors are physical, some are symbolic. This one opens choice. Choice, not revenge. Not punishment, choice. I turned the key in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. You're not angry? Adrian asked suddenly. I looked up. I am, I admitted. He nodded. But anger is loud, I continued. And he built all of this in silence. A faint flicker of approval passed across Adrian's face. He chose well, he said quietly. I looked back at the page showing West Maritime's ownership. 51%. For years, my father had sat at the head of that table believing he was untouchable. For years, my mother had performed superiority. For years, Victor had practiced entitlement. And beneath them, a silent majority stake. Waiting. For me, tomorrow, Adrian said, standing, you formalize it. And then, he studied me carefully, then you decide what kind of leader you intend to be. The question lingered long after he left the room. That night, I stood by the window overlooking Lake Geneva. Snow drifted softly across the water. The estate lights reflected in fractured patterns. I thought about my father's voice on the phone, about my mother's warning not to embarrass myself, about Victor's laughter, and I realized something that changed everything. They thought this was about money. It wasn't. It was about sight. They never saw him coming. They never saw me either. But tomorrow, that would change. I placed the gold key on the bedside table, folded the letter beneath my pillow, and lay awake listening to the quiet of a house built on patience. Somewhere deep inside me, something steady had replaced doubt. Not rage, not arrogance, control. The queen doesn't rush. She waits until the board clears, and then she moves. I barely slept, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop calculating every possible move, every possible reaction, every possible consequence. At dawn, Lake Geneva looked like polished steel beneath a pale winter sky. The estate was quiet, almost reverent, as if even the walls understood that something irreversible was about to happen. France met me at the entrance with a simple nod. "The car is ready, Miss West." Miss West. The name felt different here, not dismissive, not secondary. Definitive. The drive into Geneva was silent except for the steady hum of the engine. Snow gave way to cobblestone streets, historic facades, and discreet plaques marking private banks that controlled more wealth than most governments. Rosenberg Private Trust's headquarters did not glitter. It didn't need to. The building was understated limestone, 5 stories tall, overlooking the Rhone. No flashy signage, just a small engraved brass plate beside the door. Power that doesn't need attention is the most dangerous kind. Lucas opened the door for me again. Inside, everything was quiet marble and soft footsteps. No ringing phones, no chaos, just efficiency. A woman in a tailored navy suit approached us. "Miss West, we've been expecting you." Of course they had. I was led into a private conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. 3 individuals were already seated at the table. A legal director, a compliance officer, and Adrian. He gave me the slightest nod, no smile. This wasn't celebration, this was transition. "Miss West," the legal director began, sliding a folder toward me, "today's proceedings will finalize the transfer of Rosenberg Private Trust's controlling authority to you, per the directives of the late Mr. Elias Rosenberg." I blinked. "Rosenberg?" Adrian spoke evenly. "That was the name under which your grandfather established the trust." Another identity, another layer, another move. The compliance officer began verifying documents. Passport, biometric scan. Digital signature authentication, every step precise, meticulous, as if they were transferring not just wealth but a kingdom. "Before we proceed," the legal director continued, "you must confirm your understanding of the scope of assets involved." He turned a page toward me. The number sat there calmly. Total consolidated holdings, 4.8 billion USD. I stared at it. 4.8 billion, my pulse didn't spike, it slowed. This wasn't lottery money, this was infrastructure shipping lines. Global contracts, equity stakes, majority control of West Maritime. Control, not ownership, control. "Do you understand," he asked carefully, "that as majority holder of West Maritime Group you have the authority to restructure its executive leadership immediately?" Immediately. The word echoed like a drumbeat. Images flashed in my mind, my father at the head of the table, Victor leaning back in arrogance, my mother's voice dripping with superiority. Immediately, I looked up. "Yes," I said calmly. "And do you accept full fiduciary responsibility of Rosenberg Trust and its holdings?" This wasn't just revenge. This was accountability, risk, decision-making that could affect thousands of employees worldwide. I inhaled slowly. "I accept." Adrian placed a pen in front of me, gold, heavy, intentional. "Then please sign." For a brief second, just one, I thought about who I was 3 days ago, a schoolteacher with a worn purse. A quiet afterthought at a will reading, the girl with the smaller envelope. And now the board had flipped. I signed my name, Clara West. The moment the pen left the paper, the legal director nodded once. "It is done." No applause. No dramatic music, just a subtle shift in atmosphere, like gravity had adjusted itself around me. Adrian slid a tablet across the table. "Your digital credentials," he said. "Secure access to all trust assets?" The screen lit up with dashboards, live data, share structures, voting power, West Maritime 51% controlling stake. I stared at it. For years my father believed he was the king. He was a piece and he didn't even know it. "What is your first directive?" Adrian asked quietly. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was immediate. This was the first move after coronation. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked something else. "When is the next West Maritime Board meeting?" Adrian checked his watch. 48 hours, Seattle. Perfect. "Schedule an emergency executive session," I said. "Mandatory attendance." The compliance officer looked up. "Under what authority?" I held his gaze. "Majority shareholder review." Silence, professional, acknowledging. "It will be done," Adrian confirmed. I stood. The river flowed steadily outside the windows, unaffected, timeless. Inside, the structure of an empire had shifted. And thousands of miles away, my father was probably reviewing projections for a company he no longer controlled. The irony almost made me smile. Almost. As we exited the building, snow began to fall again. Soft, quiet, power doesn't shout, it positions. In the car back to the estate, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Not joy, not vengeance, clarity. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had never considered me part of the game. That was their fatal mistake. Back at the estate, Adrian walked with me into the library. Shelves of leather-bound volumes climbed toward the ceiling. A globe stood near the fireplace. "Seattle?" he asked. "Yes. Timing? I want them confident," I replied. "Let them enjoy the illusion for 2 more days." Adrian studied me carefully. "You're not planning a public spectacle?" It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I'm planning precision." He nodded once. Later that evening, I stood alone in the hallway beneath my grandfather's portrait. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew they would try to push you out. You knew they would treat me like a footnote. You knew silence was stronger than outrage." The house felt warmer somehow, as if it approved. My phone buzzed. "Victor," I answered. "Hey, Clara," he said casually. "Dad's finalizing some restructuring plans for next quarter. Big moves coming, you should see the projections." I leaned against the window overlooking the lake. "Sounds ambitious." "Oh, it is," he said confidently. "We're about to expand West Maritime into European luxury shipping routes. Dad's vision is finally coming together." European routes. Through partnerships they didn't even realize were already mine. I almost laughed. "That's exciting," I said evenly. "You should come by the office when I get back from New York. Maybe we'll let you sit in on a meeting, educational purposes." Educational, there it was again. The assumption, the hierarchy. "I'll be there soon," I said quietly. He chuckled. "Sure you will." When the call ended, I didn't feel anger. I felt inevitability. 48 hours, that's how long illusion had left. I returned to my room and opened the small wooden box again. The gold key glinted in lamplight. Choice, that's what my grandfather left me, not just wealth, not just control. Choice, I could humiliate them publicly. I could dismantle everything they built. I could strip titles and broadcast the truth. Or I could make one precise move that redefined the board forever. The queen doesn't announce check, she creates it. That night, I emailed Adrian one final instruction. Prepare documentation for executive leadership reassignment. Effective immediately upon board vote confirmation. He responded within minutes. Understood. Sleep came easier this time, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. And somewhere across the ocean, my family was celebrating a future that no longer belonged to them. The flight back to Seattle felt shorter, not because the distance had changed, but because I had. When the plane touched down, the city looked different through the window. Smaller, familiar, unaware. My driver was waiting at the curb this time. Not a taxi, not a rideshare. A black sedan arranged through Rosenberg's corporate office in Seattle. Efficiency, precision, no announcements, no noise. I didn't go home. I went straight to West Maritime headquarters. The building rose above the waterfront exactly as it always had, glass and steel reflecting gray skies and cold ocean wind. I'd stood outside this building 100 times before, waiting for my father. Watching executives in tailored suits pass me like I was invisible. Today, the security guard at the entrance straightened when I approached. "Good morning, Miss West." His tone had changed. Someone had already updated the system. "Good morning." The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending into memory. Every ding between floors reminded me of something. Victor mocking my small ambitions. My mother suggesting I find a husband with strategic value. My father telling me business required toughness I didn't possess. The doors opened. Executive floor, glass walls, soft carpeting, assistants moving briskly. And at the center of it, the boardroom. Through the glass, I could see them already seated. My father at the head, Victor to his right. 3 board members along the side, confident, relaxed, unaware. Adrian was already inside, seated quietly near the end of the table. He met my eyes once as I entered the hallway, a subtle nod. The final piece was in position. I pushed the door open. Conversation stopped instantly. Victor looked up first, Surprise flickered across his face. Clara, he said, didn't realize this was a family reunion. My father's jaw tightened. This is a closed executive session. I stepped inside fully and closed the door behind me. I'm aware. I took the empty seat directly across from him. No hesitation, no apology. The board members exchanged confused glances. My father folded his hands. This meeting concerns Q4 expansion strategy. I assume you're here to observe. Observe? The word almost made me smile. Adrian cleared his throat. I requested her presence. All eyes turned to him. My father frowned. And under what authority, Mr. Keller? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a folder onto the table. The same leather folder from Geneva, clean, organized, unavoidable. Under majority shareholder directive? Silence, not polite silence, heavy silence. My father's expression shifted slightly. Majority shareholder, he repeated. Victor laughed. Since when do we have surprise investors? Adrian opened the folder and turned it toward them. Ownership structure, subsidiary layering, Rosenberg Trust, 51% controlling stake. My father's eyes scanned the page once. Then again, his face didn't drain of color. He was too disciplined for that, but his breathing changed. That's incorrect, he said evenly. It's been verified, Adrian replied calmly, for over a decade. Victor leaned forward. This is some kind of legal maneuver, temporary holding structure. No, I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. It isn't. My voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it simply existed. Grandfather retained majority ownership through Rosenberg Trust. My father's gaze snapped to mine. That's impossible. He anticipated the restructuring vote in 1998, I continued. The one you initiated? The room felt smaller, colder, the board members shifted uncomfortably. You're speculating, my father said. Adrian slid certified documentation across the table. Signatures, dates, seals. This morning, Adrian added, Rosenberg Trust formally transferred controlling authority to Miss Clara West. The words settled like a gavel. Transferred, authority to me. Victor stared at me as if trying to find the joke. There's no way, he said under his breath. I held his gaze. There is. The silence stretched. This was the moment. The part most people imagine filled with shouting, with accusations, with dramatic declarations. But that isn't how power works. Power doesn't scream, it clarifies. My father leaned back slowly in his chair. You're suggesting, he said carefully, that you control this company? Yes. The single word felt heavier than any speech I could have given. The legal director on the screen, patched in from Geneva, spoke up. Per corporate bylaws, majority holder may call immediate executive vote regarding leadership structure. Victor's hands curled into fists. This is ridiculous. Clara doesn't have operational experience. I didn't look at him, I looked at the board. I have something more important than experience, I said. And what's that? One of them asked cautiously. Long-term vision. I let that settle. Then I continued. For years, this company has operated under expansion strategies that prioritize visibility over sustainability, high-risk acquisitions, over-leveraged projections. My father's eyes narrowed. You've been reviewing internal data? Yes, I replied calmly, for months. That wasn't entirely true, but they didn't know that. Confidence fills gaps information can't. I will not dismantle what you've built, I continued. I will stabilize it, Victor scoffed. You can't just walk in and take over. I already did. The air in the room shifted. Board members exchanged looks again, not loyal ones, calculating ones. My father studied me carefully now. Not dismissively, strategically. You're angry, he said quietly. This is emotional. There it was, the narrative they'd always used, too sensitive, too sentimental, too small. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. This is structural? Adrian placed one final document on the table. Executive leadership vote. Motion to reassign CEO position effective immediately. My father's name sat at the top. The board hesitated. No one wanted to be first. I leaned forward slightly. This isn't about punishment, I said. It's about direction. I looked at my father directly. You taught me that leadership means anticipating risk. His jaw tightened. Grandfather anticipated you? That one landed. The room went still again. The board chairman cleared his throat. We'll proceed to vote. One by one, hands lifted. Slowly, reluctantly. then decisively, majority confirmed. My father remained perfectly still. Victor stared at the table like it might rearrange itself. The chairman exhaled. Effective immediately, Clara West assumes interim CEO position of West Maritime Group. Interim. I almost corrected him, but I didn't need to, because control doesn't require titles shouted from rooftops. It requires majority, and I had that. My father stood slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks. Classic, composed. Be careful what you think you've won, he said quietly. I met his gaze without blinking. I'm not here to win, he paused. I'm here to finish the game. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a response. Victor pushed back his chair abruptly. This isn't over. I tilted my head slightly. No, I agreed softly. It isn't. They left the room without another word. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. And just like that, the noise was gone, the illusion dissolved. The board members looked at me differently now, not as family, not as decoration, as authority. What are your first directives, Miss West? The chairman asked. Miss West. I stood slowly. Freeze all high-risk expansion projects pending review, restructure European shipping partnerships, and initiate independent audit of executive expenditures over the past 5 years. Professional nods followed. Notes taken, action initiated. No fireworks, no applause, just implementation. After the meeting, I remained alone in the boardroom for a moment. The chair at the head of the table sat empty. I walked toward it slowly. Ran my hand along the polished wood. Sat down. The view from this angle was different. Centered, balanced, quiet. I thought about the wool reading, the smaller envelope, the laughter, the sympathy. They thought he'd left me nothing. He left me everything. But more than that, he left me timing, patience, choice. I pulled my phone from my pocket, one new message, unknown number. I opened it. A single line, trust the silence, no signature, no explanation. I smiled faintly. Outside the windows, the harbor stretched wide and gray beneath the winter sky. Ships moved steadily through cold water, unaware of the shift in leadership above them. Power doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives in an envelope. Sometimes it waits in silence, and sometimes it belongs to the one person no one thought to watch. I leaned back in the chair, not triumphant, not vengeful, steady, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of leadership built the same way he built everything else, brick by brick, quietly, and this time they would be the ones learning how the game was played.